Start recording. Um,
Alrighty.
all right. Once again, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out this week. My name is Olivia, if you don't know me. And today we are very lucky to have Heather Derflinger with Strata Clean Energy presenting to us today. But before that starts, I just wanted to remind everyone, again, that the RE+ conference experience form is still open. So if you're interested in that, I highly recommend filling it out. One of our goals is to have someone from RE+ come one of our weeks to talk about the conference. So that'll be a good chance if you're on the fence or if you're not too informed on it, that would be a good chance to learn about it. And I wanted to take just a really quick moment to highlight the career committee. That is something that Repowering Schools very recently started, and our goal is to connect with people in industry and college students so that people who want to get into the renewable energy industry are aware of the various different pathways to get there, whether it be what kind of majors to use, what classes are really beneficial, or even what type of jobs are out there. I know myself, I don't know every job that's out there in the renewable energy industry. So it's always interesting through those really quick, less than 30-minute interviews with people, you'll learn about their position, how they got into it, a little bit about their paths. If that at all seems interesting to you, I highly recommend filling out the form and joining our career committee. And in the top right corner, we have our mailing list. But without further ado, does anyone have any questions before our presentation starts? Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and introduce Heather to us all. Heather Derflinger is the Government Relations Manager at Strata Clean Energy. Heather is a dedicated communicator and environmental advocate, skilled in legislative affairs, advocacy, and public relations. In her role as Government Relations Manager at Strata Clean Energy, she channels her passion for public policy and environmentalism to advocate for legislative solutions benefiting the Commonwealth. Heather fosters enduring relationships across Virginia and remains actively involved in her community through volunteer initiatives. Holding a bachelor's degree in mass communications from Virginia Commonwealth University, Heather's dedication to her field and lifelong learning is evident through her leadership roles and accolades. Thank you so much, Heather, for coming. I can stop sharing my screen if you have a presentation, or I can leave this up if you would prefer.
I don't have a presentation, so I'm just going to talk. So either way is fine by
Okay,
me.
I can leave it up if you'd prefer.
That's fine. That's
Okay.
fine. All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm very excited to be speaking with you all today. As it says on the screen, my name is Heather Derflinger, and I work as Government Relations Manager with Strata Clean Energy. Strata Clean Energy is a utility-scale solar and battery storage developer based in Durham, North Carolina, although we've got developments and projects in 25 states. And we are one of the largest solar developers in North Carolina and Virginia. I'll go ahead and give a little bit of background on myself. Went to Virginia Commonwealth University and studied public relations and minored in environmental studies. I always had an interest in passion in politics and began seeking out political-based internships pretty early in college and interned with Congressman Connolly's office in Prince William County and Delegate Lutorian's office during the Virginia General Assembly session. I later interned with Dominion Energy in their media relations department and then worked with their government affairs team during my final semester of college during my senior year. When I graduated, I wasn't really sure exactly what I wanted to do. I didn't know if I wanted to do something in politics or something in communications and public relations. And what I ended up choosing was government affairs, and it's kind of a mixture of the two. So when I graduated, I initially ended up taking a job with Virginia Bankers Association. So they're a trade association that represents all banks in Virginia. And I worked as a lobbyist at the Virginia General Assembly, worked on their grassroots campaigns as well throughout the rest of the year. And then about a year ago, I started with Strata Clean Energy. And so my role as government relations manager kind of entails working on our lobbying and advocacy work, primarily in the state of Virginia at the state level. And then I do a little bit of work on the federal level, and we'll help out some of our other states on an as needed basis. And so for those of you that don't know or aren't super familiar with government affairs, primarily what we do is we work on building relationships and networking with policymakers, other trade associations, other stakeholder groups, to kind of create coalitions and around renewable energy and build kind of stakeholder group that can represent the industry well and kind of problem solve together. And so in my current role, I represent Strata at the General Assembly, again, in Virginia. So during General Assembly session, which is about 2 months a year in Virginia, working on legislation and working with legislators and policymakers and other stakeholder groups, like I said, to come up with sustainable solutions for the renewable energy industry. So one thing that makes Strata different from other developers is that we have in-house engineering, procurement, construction, operations, and maintenance. So we kind of see a project through from beginning to end, which is really fascinating, and it makes us unique from other developers in the state. A lot of developers don't have some of the in-house EPC work and operations and management. So once we lease the land and we build the project, and we oftentimes sell the project to a utility or co-op, we'll still maintain the lease, and then also we'll continue to do operations and maintenance on the site through the duration of the project. So that's taking care of the site. If a solar panel breaks, we're there on site to make sure things are running smoothly and be there to repair things as needed, which a lot of developers don't do. And so one thing that I kind of wanted to talk about with you all was the role of advocacy in furthering renewable energy development. I think that that is a pathway, a career path in the renewable energy field that not a lot of people are aware of. And so, like I said before, the role of advocacy really, is essential on the local, state, and federal level for the renewable energy industry. It helps encourage public acceptance of renewable energy on the local and state level, especially. That's one of the largest barriers that we see to developing projects and getting sites permitted is public acceptance and a lot of siting and permitting issues, but the largest thing really is NIMBYism, the not in my backyard. So we see that a lot, especially on the local level. There's always, different myths that go around that talk about whether or not solar panels leach toxic chemicals into the soil, or they take up too much farmland or too much forest land. And there's all sorts of things like that that kind of go around. There's even some myths. We'll hear people say that solar panels make too much noise. You all know they don't make any noise. So there's all sorts of myths and misinformation. So the big role of advocacy there is to help debunk some of those myths and spread factual information, go in and re-educate communities, local, state, and federal policymakers to make sure that they are aware of the reality of renewable energy and what it can do and what it can't do. But also, like I said before, major role of advocacy is to help build coalitions and stakeholder allies within the energy industry. And so that could be anything from forestry groups to agriculture, conservation groups, environmental groups, utilities, electric co-ops. We kind of, everybody has a lobbyist, every organization, every environmental group, every nonprofit, every utility, every corporation. So all the developers do. So we all kind of get together and we'll create coalitions and stakeholder groups as needed to make sure that we can come up with solutions together. and make sure that we have good working relationships. A lot of it is relationship building and networking based, making sure that we have good relationships on file so that if an issue arises, especially during the General Assembly session when bills are moving quickly, we can get together and ask our friends in Forestry Association how this bill will impact, how a certain bill might impact their industry. We can ask the environmental groups, is this okay with you all? Sometimes the environmental groups and the conservation groups don't agree. Sometimes the forestry groups and the ag groups don't agree. So it's all about coming together and working together to find solutions that work for everyone or as many people as possible. The also major role of advocacy is to educate and communicate with the community as well, not just the policymakers, but also local community members and the neighbors of these potential projects or current projects, and making sure that we talk with them, hold town halls and community events where we can offer educational resources and give community members a chance to ask questions to our developers and our construction staff at Strata, so that they know, that they feel like they're in the loop when we're developing a project that might be near their home or their business. So a lot of the advocacy work is also on the local level, working with community members. Like I said, one of the largest obstacles that we face as a developer is getting our projects off the ground and getting them developed. So a lot of that has to do with the NIMBYism. And then one of the major things that we face in Virginia as a developer is siting and permitting restrictions. There's a lot of setbacks and guidelines that vary from locality to locality. In Virginia has 133 localities, so counties, cities, and towns, and between all of that, the guidelines vary between each locality on what you need to get a permit for a project, and all of the steps before the permit, after the permit. There's a lot that goes into developing these projects. Let's see, and wanted to discuss a couple of the biggest arguments that we hear against solar that go and tie into the public acceptance piece, and maybe try to debunk those a little bit. So one of the most common ones that we hear is that there's a loss of agricultural land, or that it is impeding on agricultural yield and production. And what we've realized over the years is, although agriculture in general has lost, the agricultural industry in the US has lost a lot of land, primarily in the last 2 decades. There has also been an increase in production of certain crops and a lot of foods. So that part is really interesting. And solar actually has a very low impact on soils, and can actually be, if a project in a site is maintained well, it can help rejuvenate soils, and can actually provide some shading for certain crops. And agrivoltaics is a huge part of the growing solar industry right now. What we've realized is that agriculture and solar can coexist. So agrivoltaics is a big part of the solar industry now. You can grow crops under solar panels. You can have sheep, cattle, sometimes goats graze under the solar panels, so that the two of them can actually coexist and can be side by side, or can be used on the same parcel of land. The thing that is commonly heard is that toxic chemicals are leached into the soil by solar panels. We know that that is not true. The way that the solar panels are built, there is no toxic chemicals that are being leached into the soil through runoff or anything like that. Another one that we hear often is that community members will say that they're ugly, they don't want to see them, things like that. And that is something as developers that we take into account when we are developing these projects and building out our site plans. We have a lot of environmental factors that we need to consider when doing that process. And so one of those things is we make sure that we've got what they call a vegetative buffer around the project. Most localities have in their ordinance, have a requirement for the vegetative buffer, and it's usually between 50 to 100 feet of trees or some sort of native plant species. They all require different species of plants. That go around the solar site. And so oftentimes we'll even go above those restrictions. So if they require 50, sometimes we'll do 100 or 150, especially if we know that there are neighbors close by, things like that. We want to make sure that they can't see the projects, that there's as much of a barrier during the construction process as well as possible. And we'll try to leave up as many of the original trees that are there and vegetative plants as possible. So instead of planting new trees, we'll try to not knock down as many trees because there's a better chance that they won't be able to see them with an older tree than a newly planted tree. So yeah, that's kind of majority of what I had to discuss with you all. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Um, I was just kind of curious on what kind of legislation or bills is Strata most interested in supporting or pushing through?
Absolutely. So this past session, we actually worked on a bill that worked on siting and permitting reform. And so we were a big supporter of this bill, ended up getting passed and signed by the governor, although there's always some roadblocks along the way. What this bill did is it extended the expiration timeline for special use permits for renewable energy projects in Virginia to be a minimum of 3 years across the state. And so these special use permits, for those of you that don't know, for large scale developments, like some of these solar projects, like a utility scale solar project, you have to get a special use permit from the locality that you want to build and develop the project in. And you typically have, previously we did the research and it was anywhere between 6 months to 5 years. Most of them were in the 6 months to 2 year range though, to commence construction. So that's just to get your project off the ground and for them to begin construction before that permit expires. What we see now in supply chain demand and delays, issues with, there's delays in the grid interconnection process. We've got the PJM grid, the queue. There's a queue that you have to apply to when you want to develop a project. You have to get on the queue to get your project connected to the grid, and there's a huge backlog with the queue right now. So that is actually taking a lot longer than it used to. So between all of these factors, there's also a number of other permits and environmental guidelines that you have to meet, things you have to do before you can even get the special use permit. So, and then there's a lot of things you have to do afterwards as well. So basically the timeline to begin construction takes a lot longer now than it used to. And so what we did was we streamlined the expiration timeline across the state to be 3 years. I know it's kind of in the weeds bill, but that was one that we were very involved with. We're typically very interested in other siting and permitting reform bills. That's kind of our biggest, like I said, that's our biggest challenge in the state right now. So that's what we spend the most time and attention on. There was a lot of localities have passed effective almost bans or moratoriums on solar development in the state. So there are some localities that have basically passed ordinances that ban any new solar developments in their counties, cities, or towns in Virginia. Some have even placed bans on solar developments that are over, I believe it is like basically solar projects that are of certain sizes. And so that puts a huge restriction and strain on what can actually be developed. Mm-hmm. So there was a bill this past session that they lovingly called it the ban on bans bill. So it was a bill that would ban localities from placing bans on solar. So we were a supporter of that one. That one did not pass. It was a more extreme bill comparatively to some other ones. So that one did not pass, but I'm sure it will be back next year. I'm sure we will see it again. Anything that, makes our project, any bills that help to make our projects safer or better for the community, we always look out for as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Ray sent a question in the chat I can read out to you. Are you seeing a lot of pushback on battery storage projects like you have been with solar?
That is a great question. We are always seeing pushback on battery storage. If anything, I would say we are almost seeing not as much it's not as public, I guess, or you don't see it as much in the media as you do with solar, but there is a lot of pushback on battery storage projects. There's the biggest myth that we see is that people think they're going to catch on fire. They're going to like set everything around it on fire. That is very rare. Can't say that it hasn't happened in the past, not with our projects, but with other that large scale battery storage projects, but the technology has improved so much over the years that it's really not as much of a concern now. What I've learned recently and going to tour one of our battery storage facilities is that each of the individual units within the large battery have a fire suppression unit inside. So if a fire does start, it's supposed to suppress it and put itself out almost and contain it from spreading to the rest of the battery or outside of the battery. We also have rules and guidelines, again, kind of dictated locality to locality on how close battery storage units can be together. So a battery storage facility may have 10 of the large, they're almost like trailer sized units. And so a lot of them have to be anywhere from 10 to 50 feet apart. So that is something a measure that we take to kind of try to make the public feel a little bit better about battery storage. But yes, we do still see pushback on battery storage. Some people also think that it's going to be loud or they're going to hear noise from it, and they don't make any noise.
I had another question if
Sure.
no one else wants to jump in before me.
You can ask first. I do have a follow-up on the battery storage.
Why don't you go ahead and ask that then, Zahir?
Okay. So Heather, you mentioned a lot of pushback on all sorts of energy technologies. I wanted to ask about specifically about the regulation around importing battery cells, right? So there's a lot of tariffs being introduced specifically from any imports from China, which is actually the biggest supplier of batteries at the moment. So how has that impacted your development of your projects, or how do you take into account these new regulations for building new projects in the future? Because although there's many new battery plants that are being built in the United States right now, but they're first of all a long ways away, and also they're going to be more expensive. So how does all of that affect the outlook on battery storage systems?
That is a great question. That's definitely, those tariffs are something that we are monitoring very closely on a day-to-day basis, because they will impact our industry and our business significantly. But I think the most that I can speak to on that is that I think we're just monitoring it and kind of keeping an eye to see what direction things go with the tariffs, and also exploring other options. There are a lot of US-based manufacturers that are trying to get off the ground. So it's kind of a waiting game in some ways to see when some of those might come online or when they will become more prevalent in the battery storage construction industry in the US. So
Do you
It's
think this is a
definitely,
blow to the progress of, battery storage systems?
I would definitely say so. I think it's going to slow development for sure for a little
Mm-hmm.
bit. I think that as well, like costs will have to adjust with the project development, but also, yeah, it may slow things down a little bit. I think that there are still a lot of companies out there. Some utilities and co-ops are still a little bit weary of getting too into the battery storage industry yet. We're investing too much into it yet. There's a lot of developers in the battery storage space, but as far as um, people that are buying the energy from the battery storage,
Right.
that's still something that is kind of slowly growing. We're kind of needing to kind of wait that one out a little bit. I think, yeah, it'll definitely slow the battery storage industry growth, but it doesn't mean that it's not growing, and that doesn't mean that they're not being developed. Strata just began construction on a 1 gigawatt battery storage project in Phoenix, Arizona, a couple weeks ago. So, that is a massive, massive battery storage project. Just to put that in perspective. So there are battery storage is still going to continue growing, and it's definitely what I think is also going to happen is despite supply chain issues and despite increased tariffs, I think that they are a very necessary part of grid reliability moving forward. I think that in order for the U.S. to meet its increasing energy needs and to support, like I said, support grid reliability, we're going to need battery storage systems. So, I think that they're going to have to be integrated more over time.
Yeah.
For sure. But it may slow for a period, but it will pick back up. I feel like that's certain.
Thank you.
Of course.
So my question, Heather, you were saying that a lot of your job is when General Assembly is in and you're working on those bills. I'm kind of curious on what your day-to-day looks like when you're not in General Assembly. What is your tasks and your responsibilities?
Absolutely. So a lot of what we do when we're not in session, the General Assembly, is start working on bills for next year. So coming up with any ideas that we want to potentially present to legislators to say, hey, this could be a good idea for a bill. Would you like to carry the bill? And then beginning the research process behind that bill. You want to make sure you have facts and data to back up whatever bill you're trying to present. And then there's getting the bill written and creating talking points, starting to talk to other stakeholder groups and communicate that bill to other stakeholder groups to get their input on the bill before you file the bill or before you present it. You want to make sure that you're not going to upset any of your major members of your coalition or other stakeholder allies or industry allies. So, doing your due diligence to talk to the right people and talk to your friends in the industry to make sure that you're not negatively impacting conservation industry or the forestry folks. You want to make sure that doing your due diligence there. A lot of what we also do is keep working on community engagement efforts. So, like I said, focusing on hosting town halls in different communities, things like that. One of the things that we're trying to work on now is getting some legislators and policymakers that work on a lot of these bills during session out to come see some of our solar sites. So taking them on some tours so that when these bills come across their desk in the future, they have a better understanding of what goes into these projects. They get a chance to talk to our construction staff and our developers that are on site to hear from them exactly, how these projects work so that the legislators are more informed. But it also gives the legislator a better perspective on these projects when they're looking at the applicability of those bills and how they'll actually impact the industry. And not just the industry, but the people that are doing the more kind of in-depth work, yeah, like our construction staff and things like that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have any questions for Heather?
Yeah, hi Heather.
Hi.
I had a question. Like as you mentioned, you have a lot of conversation with government entities, and you do a lot of work in passing certain bills and legislation. So my question was, during those conversations, is there a part, if any, do the Federal Reliability Council or the like the NERC and the FERC entities, what role do they play in this?
Wait, I'm so sorry. It broke up a little bit. Can you repeat the second half of your question, the second part?
So I wanted to know what is the role, if any, do the FERC and the NERC entities play in passing these legislations?
Mm, that's a very good question. I don't know that I have an answer for that one, but I'd be happy to find out and get back to you.
Uh, and as we were having during this meeting, I was just going through the Strata Clean Energy website. So in the company section, it says it is a family-owned company. So I was just curious what that entails.
Yeah, yep. So Strata is a family-owned and operated development company. So essentially our CEO and his wife started the company years ago, and they still own it, and he is still CEO to this day. So in that aspect, it is family owned.
Awesome.
Which I
Thank you
think,
so much.
yeah, of course. And I think that it gives Strata kind of a really good work environment. Kind of gives it more of a family feel. Any other questions? Be happy to try and answer.
Yeah, one more. I hope I'm not. I want to let others ask questions as well if anyone else has any questions. If not, I'll go ahead. Nobody? Okay. All right. So I'm still trying to understand the energy markets and overall how the state of the energy industry is in the United States. So, and what I've seen is it's very convoluted in terms of it might be easy to develop a project in Texas than it would be in Virginia and so on, right? So there's all these regulations starting from federal down to state and county, even city and all that. So how have you found navigating this regulation landscape, and how does it differ throughout the states? And which state would you say is the easiest right now for the development of a new solar or battery project?
That's a very good question. Oh goodness. We definitely do. We do operate in 25 states, and so we see there's definitely a disparity in some states where it's easier to get a project off the ground than in others, depending on what regulations that state has and what is required for a project to get off the ground in that state. But like I said, it also differs from locality to locality. So it gets a little tricky, but and then in some states it's easier to do battery storage. It's easier to do battery storage than it is to do solar, or in some states it's easier to do solar than battery storage. So I think that's something we also consider as well. I would say that I don't know if there's an easiest state to develop solar or battery storage in. I would say, we've had a lot of luck in developing projects in Virginia. I think now localities are starting to push back a little bit more, but I would say Virginia and North Carolina, we've had a lot of Strata, at least, has had a lot of luck in developing solar and battery storage projects. I think on the West Coast, we are seeing more development of battery storage projects beginning to become more prevalent. So that's something that we're definitely keeping an eye on and trying to be a part of.
So would you say at this point, a lot of the states have started to warm up to the idea of these projects? I mean, are they more eager to do it now than they were, let's say, 5 years ago? And you said you're mostly most of the projects from Strata are in Virginia. So any in the Loudoun County, given all the data centers?
So I would say we don't have a ton in Loudoun County, just because they've got some restrictive ordinances there. But I would say that battery storage is going to be needed a lot in that county, I would say, in the next couple of years because of the data centers. The development of the data centers is definitely going to draw an increased need for grid reliability in the Northern Virginia area and all of Virginia and probably surrounding states. So those data centers are going to need a lot of energy from the grid. And I don't know, there's a concern right now that our grid is not necessarily in its current state able to support the future energy need from those data centers. So yeah, things like battery storage are going to be a huge part of the solution there. And yeah, most of Strata's projects are in Virginia and North Carolina. So I would say for us, those are the states that we have focused most on. I think I've only been working with Strata for a year, so I can't speak to the last 5 years, but from my understanding, states and localities, while there is increased pushback, there's an increased need for projects like this. Like in Virginia, they passed the Clean Economy Act in 2020, which basically mandates certain goals for the state to meet and for the utilities and co-ops to meet our clean energy goals as a state. So things like decreasing carbon footprint and emissions reduction, things like that. So renewable energy development as a whole and battery storage is a huge part of that. It's a huge component of that. So some of our customers like Dominion Energy and utilities and other organizations too have an increased need to buy more renewable energy projects to meet those clean energy goals. So there's more of it. I don't know if I would say that they want to do it more, but there's more of a need, at least.
Well, it's good to know we're going to be needed more in the future. So that's nice. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Anyone else have any other questions?
I have a question. What are your expectations or your risk evaluation for the next presidential term if it changes to another administration? Do you have any foresight for that?
That is a very interesting question. I don't think that we have a risk evaluation plan in place, but I think that, we are prepared to work with whatever administration would come into office to the best of our ability as an industry. I think that there definitely is some concern if there's an administration change. There's definitely going to be some concern about tariffs and supply chain and things like that. But projects, regardless of what happens, projects will still. Yep, that's right. The show must go on. Projects will still be developed. So, and one thing that we're doing on the state level is, really, really trying, at least Strata, we're really trying to work with both sides of the aisle. That's a huge part of the advocacy work in general is you can't pick and choose who you talk to. No matter what your political leaning is, you need to work with Democrats and Republicans, and in order, especially if you want to get a bill passed that does good work, you have to work with both sides. And so there's some growing groups and organizations in Virginia. There's one in particular called Energy Right that is kind of interesting. It is a conservative-based energy, like, I don't even know exactly how to describe them. I think they're a nonprofit, but I don't want to misspeak on that. But they're a conservative-based group that supports energy production and clean energy in Virginia. And so they do a lot of really great work on educating legislators on what, like, if they are a Republican, why they should support clean energy and why it's good for business, why it's good, certain talking points work better with Republicans versus Democrats. So that's always something we take into account. But that's just an example of an organization that's doing some work to work with both sides of the aisle.
Thank you. Yeah, I was basically asking because I've heard the argument that most of the grid scale projects are in the red states. So regardless if it changes, there's still some economic projects involved. So that's good. Thank you.
Yep. From a business and development standpoint, there's a lot of Republican support there. So, like you said, there are a lot of developments on the grid scale that are in some of the red states. So, the show will continue to go on. Projects will be developed regardless of who's in office.
Does anyone have any other questions or comments? Okay, well, thank you again so much, Heather, for presenting and giving your wonderful insight afterwards. We are going to go into our networking portion. You're welcome to stay, or if you need to hop off, that's completely okay too. Up to you.
Awesome. Well, I'll drop my email in the chat, or I'll give it to Olivia to share with you all, but also feel free to look me up on LinkedIn, follow me on LinkedIn, and
Yes,
stay in
thank
touch.
you.
Feel free to reach out if you ever have any questions.
Thank you.
Thank you all for having me.
Oh, I forgot to change the slide until right now.
Oh, good.
So for the last couple of minutes, now it's only the few of us. I would love to know how your projects are going in your internships. And I'm really interested to hear if you're getting a chance to exercise new skills or if you're getting any new experiences. Please feel free to share anything.
I mean, I guess you're mostly up to date given our last call last week. But yeah, things are definitely picking up steam. So getting more and more work by the day. And I mean, definitely some interesting things, some new things. So excited, but also kind of pressed for time at this point of the internship. But yeah, I mean, for the most part, most of the goals I had from the internship, I would say it's going according to plan. Yeah.
When is your internship? When is the final date for it?
So our internship ends on August 16th.
Mm.
So we do have some time, but I mean, given the projects that I'm involved with, I guess that would require a little more time if I wanted to do it at an easier pace.
Right. And
Yeah.
there never seems to ever be enough time for anything.
Exactly. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I mean, as he said, things are picking up. We have some of our leadership team visiting in a couple of weeks, so we have to have our deliverables ready. But I would say it is the good kind of pressure rather than the bad kind.
Yeah.
And yeah, and one thing that I'm learning new in this internship is basically some data analytics skills, because uh, some of the analysis that I'm doing has given me a lot of data, and I have no idea how to navigate
You,
through that. So
you can ask me, right? I'm
I
doing a
know,
master's in analytics.
I know,
You haven't asked me yet, so
because you're not here in the room.
oh, okay. I'll
Yeah,
get back to you.
I was gonna talk to you after this meeting, but yeah.
How closely do you two work on your projects?
We have different teams, so our projects are different actually.
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
completely different teams. Yeah.
Zahir is working more on like he's doing some work on AI as well as some optimization stuff, whereas I am working on doing load flow studies.
Hmm.
So, mine I would say is more electrical focused, whereas his is more data and business driven.
Right. Do you guys still come together and share your progress, like as a whole team, or not a whole team, but as like an internship, maybe? I'm not sure how I'm trying to word that.
You mean, go ahead. Mhm.
Yeah, I mean he sits behind me, so we definitely talk during our day, and we discuss what we both are working on. So it's a nice conversation to know what each of us are working on. So yeah.
But if you were asking in terms of, sharing with the whole team, like a stand-up or something, we do have like our separate team meetings every week, where we can share like the progress, uh, but for the whole company, yeah, we are going to have a presentation towards the end of our.
Yeah, I was
I
curious.
yeah, yeah.
Go ahead.
Sorry. No, I was just gonna say I don't think that is company wide. That is your team members will attend that meeting.
Yeah, I was
Yeah.
curious if your projects would culminate to like a showcase at the end, like a company-wide showcase or even a location-wide showcase.
I
So
think
the
there's some
thing,
possibility.
yeah,
And everyone is invited, but of course, not everyone can make it. So
Right.
it's mostly going to be our own teams.
But that'll
because
still be a really good experience.
yeah,
Of
because in
course.
our case, so my team, other than the VP, like a vice president of our team, everybody else is scattered around the US. So it will most likely be like a Zoom presentation to everybody.
That would be really cool.
Mhm.
Well, I really look forward to hearing more about it in the next coming weeks. It's only us three, but next week we're gonna have Nick from Pattern Energy come present to us, and his topic or presentation, I believe, is focusing on career opportunities, but I'm not sure if that means career opportunities within Pattern specifically or within the renewable energy industry as a whole. So we'll have to tune in next week to find out. But I will send a follow-up with Heather's info and about next week's presentation. So definitely check your emails for that. I apologize for the really late follow-up. We were very down to the wire about our speaker today, and we were so grateful to have Heather. And it ended up turning out to be a really great presentation. I am very pleased with how it went in the Q&A, went really well. So is there any questions or comments?
No, all good.
No, I
Thank
think
you
we are good.
again.
Yeah.
See
Thank
you
you
next
guys
week.
so much.
Thank you. We'll see you
Goodbye.
next week.
See ya.
Bye bye.